Hey Ringside crew, welcome to the internationally known Dudes at Ringside podcast. And now here's your host, Joe, Panther the Third.
Hello there, wrestling fans, and welcome to another episode of the internationally known Dudes at Ringside podcast. I am your host, Joe Panther the Third, and we're in the middle of Women's Wrestling Month. And today I have a woman that is from the great down under. I've had so many awesome women from Australia past 3 years, now 4 of Dudes at Ringside. First, it started off with the one and only Savannah Summers. Then it was Izzy. Then it was, and the males too. I want to thank Mr. Jordy Sparkles. And then there was another Australian wrestler on. I can't remember her name. I know she's a deathmatch wrestler. But now, adding another name to the wall, I got to toot the horn. Doo, 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 doo. Let's give a warm Dudes at Ringside welcome to the queen of Australian wrestling, Riley. Welcome, Riley.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm so excited to be here.
Welcome, Riley. So, who trains you?
So who trains me? Funny story. So all my training is done by Joe Mundy at the Adelaide Championship Wrestling Academy. So who also happens to be my husband. Spoiler.
Awesome. So what is it like to be trained by your husband instead of some random person?
It is it's tough. It's actually really tough. It's because it's good, but it's tough, right? You know, I see him when he's so when he trains other people, when he trains me, he's incredible as well. But when he trains other people, he is so incredible, and he has just this way of teaching, and I'm so proud of what he teaches. He teaches on a level of stuff that we've learned from, international talents who come over and run seminars. So, and he takes this training really seriously, and, he's amazing. But when it is your husband, you do tend to butt heads a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes the patience and the stuff that he might have with other people, he doesn't necessarily have with me. And then that's the same with me in return as well, someone telling you what to do type thing, especially when it's your husband, you're like, and not to take things, you can tend to take things a bit personally as well. So it's tough, and they have just such a higher expectation of you as a wrestler and a performer and things like that as well. So they, what other people may get away with, you definitely don't.
Wow. So what made you get into this big world of professional wrestling?
Yeah. So I didn't get, I actually probably started it a little bit later in life. And, I always see the young kids coming up and probably a little bit jealous of, man, I wish I'd found this sooner. But I've always really been into sort of alternative, use the word alternative, and more, full on physical sports. So I've done a lot of surfing, a bit of ice hockey, skateboarding, just that stuff's always really interested me. I like that more physicality of things. And then where I live, so I'm from South Australia, and where I live, wrestling it's not as widespread or as common, I guess. Maybe sometimes, I'm not sure, what the scene's like in America, but everyone's sort of, and people probably heard of WWE, but there's sort of a bit of a misconception, people don't realize that it's happening here locally as well. I think obviously that's changed since now having someone like Rhea Ripley, who is from South Australia as well. So now that's very much there's wrestling here in South Australia. And so it wasn't in the part where I was living. And then when I moved into a different sort of area, then I started seeing posters, local posters around for shows and for training as well. So, so I went along, and I was like, well, I was sort of in between sort of sports at the time, and I was like, well, I need a bit of hobby, need a bit of something to do, and here we are. And that initial training didn't happen, and it with my husband, but it's where I met my husband. So that was back in 2009. Probably didn't wrestle. Like I wrestled one sort of match, and it wasn't great, and I wasn't properly trained at that particular point of time. Obviously, as I said, not by my husband, it was someone else training here in the state. And then I was a manager for a while, and then I did the mum thing. So then I stopped, and it wasn't until I think like the end of 2015 that I decided that I wanted to go back. And by this point, we'd started Adelaide Championship Wrestling at that particular point. My husband had set up that company, so I thought, what better time, and went and actually trained then in 2015, with a 3-year-old in tow and all that sort of fun stuff as well.
Awesome. So what is it like traveling these days within professional wrestling? Like, is it hard now with like the kids and stuff like that, or do they tag along with you when you're like on a big road trip when you go on show to show?
Yeah, so like travel, like so a lot of traveling that I did before I sort of had originally hung up the boots for a little while is that I did most of that on my own, and I would just jump on a plane, fly to the show on the day, spend the night, come back, and it was always done like in a weekend. But one of my sort of favorite ones that I did was we actually went down to Tasmania. So it was a promotion called TCW in Tasmania. So if you look at an Australian map, it's that little bit that's not attached to us down the bottom. You got to sort of fly over the water. And so hubby in tow, kid in tow, our best friends in tow who were also wrestlers at the time, their kid, and it was like an Airbnb. We actually made a holiday out of it for like a week or two, which was just, amazing. We went and wrestled the show, and then we, went and did family holiday, which was pretty cool. But my kid's been, he's been born into it as well, like he, I was around the business in 2009, and my husband's been wrestling since 2006. And so the moment that he was born, I've got pictures of him like standing in a ring when he's like not even a year old, like he was just born into the business. So he's pretty used to it anyway.
Awesome. So you have any like crazy stories from the road, or like any crazy stories for any matches you've had in the beginning of your career?
Define crazy. I guess like one that's been doing circulation recently that's sort of been brought top of mind was that, and this was at TCW and happened to be at that actual show that we're talking about with the kid in tow and everything like that, is that I actually suffered my first concussion, which is obviously not cool, but on the flip side, sort of not, I don't want to call it silver linings, but it had a little bit of a funny incident. So at that particular show, I was wrestling as a heel, but typically most of my work has always been based as a face. So I'm typically a face wrestler, but when I went down to this promotion, I wrestled as a heel. Unfortunately, suffered a concussion right at the end of the match. Thank God, finished the match, went backstage, but also they then had like a big rumble afterwards that I was a part of as well. So like a whole nother match to wrestle. And so with that one there, what I didn't realize, obviously I didn't realize that I was, concussed, right? And, there was a point I was sort of walking off backstage and they're like, Riley, your music's playing. I'm like, oh, what are you talking, And I've gone out and I have like wrestled in this entire rumble. And I have this pure gap in time. So I actually can't remember it. I don't remember any of it. I don't remember doing it. It's just that there's footage of me doing it so that I know what happened. And it was just like the most incredible thing, because what happened is I went out and I obviously concussed, went and wrestled with like muscle memory, right? Like,
yeah,
like just instinct. I don't know. It was the weirdest thing, but obviously went out there and wrestled. My muscle memory included wrestling as a face instead of a heel. So probably confused the crowd to no end of why she like getting, and I was doing like crowd work the whole lot. Like I wasn't just like going through the motions. I was like setting people up for those little crossbodies and corners and like lighting them up and getting the crowd into it and all this sort of stuff. No recollection of it whatsoever. And then saw the footage back the next day, and it was just like, I have no idea how that happened. And I was almost like sort of, I didn't want to say I didn't want to worry anyone either. Like when I'd sort of worked out that, hey, like when I sort of started patching my time together, I was like, oh, something's not right here. I didn't want to, because I had obviously my family and everything there. I didn't want to worry anyone. So it took me ages just to even say that I'd had this concussion as
Just again,
well.
like, yeah, it was supposed to happen that way. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, like everyone, like my husband's like, why are you wrestling as a face? Like, what you're a heel? Like, what's going on? You know, like, and it was just, I don't know, the level of like doing things like crowd work and stuff like that. It was just crazy, right? Like, it just blew my mind. And then another like cool, not this necessarily didn't happen on the road, but this happened like locally here in Adelaide, not for one of our shows, but for a company called BCW who traveled around and they were bringing down internationals. So they brought down a few internationals, but one of these had included Chavo Guerrero.
Wow.
And yeah, like, and him and I seemed to hit it off really, really well. Like, just had like he's got a lot of time for people who are really passionate about wrestling, and obviously like I'm addicted and passionate and like such a sponge when it comes to wrestling and stuff like that as well. I love talking to anybody and everybody about it and learning off of anyone I can. And you know, it had a bit of a, you know, like I think it's like another Rumble. And, you know, and I'm like, oh, you know, if you've got any feedback, and he's sitting up in the rafters, like watching like little old B, like, and literally came to me after it, you know, with feedback and all this sort of stuff. And then proceeded to give, like, it was almost like having like a one-on-one seminar with it, like seminars that I would pay people money to go and attend, right? Like all the stuff that he was then, you know, he's so passionate about the business and learning, helping people grow. And then, you know, people from my locker room that I train with, you know, started walking, and it became this whole like locker room private seminar thing. It was like the coolest thing ever. You just like, you know, like sometimes you like, you know, like they say, sometimes like don't meet your heroes, but like in this case, like he was just like the most coolest dude, and he just imparted so much wisdom, you know, for us. And that's just, you know, that's for me, that's a moment I'll never forget.
Awesome. So most wrestlers don't really remember their very first match, but do you remember any like parts of your very first match? And if you do, let's go into it.
Okay, well, first match, yes, I do. So it depends if we look at like 2009 first match, and this is like the first match that really could have just put me off of wrestling. Like I was put in a ring when I shouldn't have been put in a ring, you know, like, and I was put in a ring because the promoter, you know, wanted to bring a girl down for his own, you know, he was like one of those guys. And that match we call the match of never-ending waist locks. It was waist lock into waist lock into waist lock. It was like the only move that I knew at the time, like a little bit of chain wrestling. It was awful. And at that point, and that's when I then changed. I was like, this is not for me. I'm going to be a valet. I'm going to be a manager, you know, and that sort of turned it from there. But then my first proper match after being trained correctly and properly, it was a tag match, and it was myself and my husband versus the people that we went to Tasmania with. So it was at the time our best friend and his wife, you know, like they were our best friends. So it was another husband and wife duo in a tag, like a mixed tag match. And I still watch it. Like I love that match, you know, like, and it was more like my friend and I, we trained together. Her and I, we trained up together. So our husbands already did it. They're the ones who owned the company, ran the company. And so then we came along to train, and we did our training together as well. So we went through the fundamental course that ACW offers. We did that together. We trained together. And so then we got to have our first match together, which was really, really exciting. It was more spots than I guess it was like a whole, you know, like it was more the boys doing the match and us coming in for some specific spots. But that was just boom. From there, we were in there having matches. So yeah, and I still use, it's funny, you know, like things I was using in that match, like moveset wise, there are some like that I still, you know, that they've become my signature moves and moves that I use all the time.
So what, like, with your first match, like, what was your music that you came with? Do you remember that?
No. I know, like, yes and no. Yeah, I do, because I'm using it now, funny enough. So this is like the 2015 reiteration, not the very dreaded first, like that very first match that I will, you know, like that we never speak about. That was
Waistlock
like
of hell.
We're like,
This actually should call it the Waistlock from Hell match.
Yes. It was just like the never ending ways. No, it was awful. That one was, I came out to Tarantula by Pendulum, so that's an Australian like drum and bass, yeah, sort of situation. Now I use, and it's funny. So, but then when I came back, when I was wrestling properly, and from after that first match, then I was having matches consistently and continued wrestling. It's called Miss Hyde by Hailstorm.
Okay.
And and then with my comeback, I've actually gone back to using that one there. So that's actually still now my music now.
So, with it being Women's Wrestling Month, who would be your top 5 all-time favorite women's wrestlers?
All right, so top all 5. So I'm like, it is going to be a bit old school. Like Lita is going to be right up there because that's sort of the time in which I was watching a lot of wrestling. Mickie James, Trish Stratus, like I really love that sort of classicness of, that sort of, they didn't necessarily have the greatest time. Beth Phoenix, so they're definitely ones that I would pop in there. 5th one, like how can I also then look past China as well? So you can tell, like when I started watching wrestling, it was in the Attitude Era, right? Like, and I think that my choices of women's wrestlers definitely really, really reflect that. In that sort of side of things now. Is that the same now? Not necessarily, like obviously keeping an eye out on what people are doing. Like I like, some things that are happening at the moment, like Toni Storm. Like I think she's really, really cool. Like I just love everything.
Remember, tits out.
Yes. It's very I don't know if you've watched the show The Amazing Mrs. Maisel, The Marvelous Mrs.
Yes,
Maisel.
I've seen that show. Yeah,
tits out, like tits up, like yeah, I love that.
and watch for the shoe. What?
Yeah, that's it. Like, and and you can't look past people like AJ Lee and stuff like that as well. That were obviously doing something, and I think that sort of shows, like with the girls that I did like were obviously very sort of alternative as well, and weren't that classic diva, if you will. And I think that's more a reflection on what I gravitated towards and still do, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on. Like, this is so cool that like somebody on the other opposite side of the world is with me on this podcast and helping me roll in year 4 of the podcast and to help me work and get this Women's Wrestling Month off on the right foot.
Yeah, that's cool.
It makes me happy to honor women's wrestlers in February. And like people always ask me in like the past 4 years, the beginning, why do you always do women's wrestling? What's with the women's wrestling? I'm like, women's wrestlers don't get the credit they deserve, especially the independent scene. The guys I see always go, wow, this guy, that guy. And I'm like, what about the women? They do bring the roster up a lot more than showing them do like wearing the skimpy outfits. You guys take the bumps and bruises.
Yeah.
And you don't get the flowers you guys deserve. Like,
yeah. Definitely. And in my career itself as well, like I guess a lot of my career, I haven't, and that sounds a bit funny, I haven't done a lot of women's wrestling. I've, like 90% of my career has been intergender wrestling where, because this is because the pool of women is so small, right? Especially here in Australia, like we've got some like really like epic and awesome women's wrestlers, but when you dissect through things like politics or logistics and stuff like that, the chances of us actually all getting to work together is really, really slim. I spent most of my career wrestling 6'4" men, like that's what I've made my name off of, and that's and that's what I'm known for. So even at the moment it's more sometimes jumping into women's wrestling is very different for me as well. There's a very different mindset, a very different game as well.
Well, before we go, Riley, if my fans would like to pick up any like Riley merch, where can they find it?
Shoot me a DM. So at the moment, I was, I've only just come back. I'm only like 4 matches back in after having 3 years off. So I don't have an online store or anything just yet. Watch this space, I will. So, but happy for people to, DM me on Instagram is probably the best place to do that. And then I can, definitely arrange to, I've only, have shirts and stuff like that sent out. That would be the best way so far. I know I've got to get my stuff organized, but that'll be a 2024 problem.
Yeah. I want to thank you so much, Riley, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And please tell your friends in Australia about Dudes at Ringside. Tell the women's wrestlers, Women's February. This month is Women's Wrestling Month. I would love to have more of Australians women's wrestlers. And there's some biggies that I've not had from Australia. You're one of the biggies. So you're on the top of you're the queen. So you're on top of that mantle. I finally got you. on that wall. Like, what do they call that? Mount Rushmore. So you're like there, Savannah, Izzy, and Mr. Sparkles is all sparkly in the corner, even though your crown is sparklier than all of it. He's a little sparkly, but your crown's very sparkly.
Yeah.
I'm going like the cat. I'm doing this. Sparkly. So, Riley, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm Joe Panther III.
I'm Riley. Thank you for joining us.
And we will catch you in the next one. Have a good night and have a good day, everybody.